Candy is Franco-Nigerian and lives in New York City. Candy, take it away.
Thank you so much, Marilyn, for the introduction. I'm really, really happy to be here and excited for this really important conversation. I would move to the next slide, please. So I thought, given the sort of global dimension of the research that I'm going to present, I would just explain the rationale, show some snapshots from the defenders that we've interviewed, and before we kind of zoom in on sort of applications of some of what we found to Canada. So today it's well established that the burning of fossil fuels emits greenhouse gases that trap heat, that are the root cause and the primary driver of human-induced climate change. What we were hoping to do with this research was twofold. On the one hand, to sort of demonstrate that the full life cycle of fossil fuel extraction, production, transportation, and decommissioning does not only harm our climate system, but harms people and nature. And we were hoping to demonstrate the scale of this global harm. So at Amnesty, we support and we work very closely with human rights defenders across the globe. And we know that Indigenous people, traditional communities, and people who live near fossil fuel infrastructure, who sometimes we designate as fence-line communities, are putting their lives at risk to stand up against extractive projects. So this report is really just provides yet more evidence of the imperative for the world to transition away from fossil fuels and to embark into a just and equitable transition to renewable energy that should be produced in a manner that's consistent with human rights. Next slide, please. We launched the report and its finding at the Climate Summit COP30 that was hosted in Brazil at the end of last year. It was the product of months of research. The report was well received. We launched it during the press conference where we had Amnesty's Secretary General, Agnes Calama, present the findings, along with Alicia Anderson, who's a Brazilian artisanal fisher and organizer. His leadership is featured in the report, alongside Kitty Naidoo, who some of you may know as former Secretary General of Amnesty, who now presides the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. So I thought we could watch a brief video that summarizes some of the key findings of the report before we do a deeper dive into what we found. Over to you, Tara.
Fish.
I love these images, they always move me. So the report used mixed methods. We combine a global mapping of fossil fuel infrastructure worldwide with stories from the front line, from the funders that we interviewed across the Americas and West Africa. So in an attempt to demonstrate scale, we worked with a group of data scientists at Diverted Laboratory which is a nonprofit affiliated with the University of Colorado Boulder in the United States, to try to map out both current and future fossil fuel projects worldwide. As you can see on this map that's color-coded, you have sort of a distribution of projects. BPL found over 18,000 fossil fuel infrastructure sites that are currently operating today. Next slide. They also identified an additional 3,500 fossil fuel infrastructure sites that are either proposed in development or under construction globally. Next slide. We then asked BPL to overlay that information about extraction points with population data to roughly estimate the number of people that live in close proximity to fossil fuel infrastructure sites. And they use buffer zones of 1 kilometer and 5 kilometer. And the numbers were, they found were pretty staggering. If you just look at the 18,000 plus currently operating fossil fuel infrastructure sites, data scientists found that at least 463 million people, including 124 million children, live within 1 kilometer of fossil fuel infrastructure. When you expand that buffer to 5 kilometers, it's at least 2 billion people. So roughly a quarter of the world's population lives today within 5 kilometers of such infrastructure sites. That includes more than 520 million children. The reason why this is concerning is because proximity to fossil fuel infrastructure has been associated with negative health outcomes, including but not limited to elevated risks of cancer, cardiovascular illness, bronchitis, asthma, adverse reproductive outcomes, anxiety, depression, among others. Last but not least, despite representing less than 5% of the global population, BPL found that at least 16% of known fossil fuel infrastructure sites today are located on indigenous territories. Next slide.
Whoa!
BPL also found that 32% of existing fossil fuel infrastructure sites that were able to map today overlap with one or more critical ecosystems, and by that we mean ecosystems that are essential for land-based practices, rich in biodiversity, critical for carbon sequestration. And it's even worse when you look at plant infrastructure, which is disproportionately located in critical ecosystems, with approximately 69% of these sites having such an overlap. Next slide. So the report pairs the results of this quantitative data analysis with stories from defenders. So we had a core group of MSc researchers that I was a part of that interviewed land and water defenders, climate activists, and representatives of both indigenous peoples and traditional communities from the Americas and West Africa. In Brazil, we interviewed artisanal fishers from Guanabara Bay in Rio de Janeiro. In Canada, we interviewed wet soil and land defenders. We'll get them directly in a minute. In Senegal, we interviewed artisanal fishers whose subsistence activity is at risk because of offshore oil and gas drilling. Next slide. And the report also features campaigns that Minisy has been supporting for years, from artisanal fishers in Colombia, the Warriors of the Amazon fighting against gas flaring in Ecuador, and environmental human rights defenders in the Niger Delta, where my family is actually from, pushing against sort of decades of pollution from oil extraction. So I'll just give you a brief snapshot of the findings that emerged from the research and that cut across jurisdictions, which I think is really helpful to realize that we're going to talk about Canada specifically today, but these are trends that are pretty systemic and that apply across various regions. Next slide. So the first element is that it was very apparent that for the oil and gas extraction sites that we investigated, extraction creates pollution hotspots and turns communities into sacrifice zones. It was clear that there's a lack of environmental monitoring and transparency from authorities high-grade environmental hazards through oil spills, gas leaks, that pose very serious health, both physical and mental, and environmental risk both to animals, but also the ecosystems we're a part of. Next slide. Fossil fuel infrastructure, be it for extraction, transportation, and even when it's decommissioned, uses vast amounts of land and it encroaches upon critical waterways. So across the board, it leads to erosion of territorial integrity, and it poses an existential threat to many indigenous people and traditional communities. Next slide. The construction and operations of fossil fuel infrastructure is often enforced without the free, prior, and informed consent of indigenous people and fence-land communities that are impacted by such projects. And so the defenders who we interviewed across the regions in which we worked, they all face severe safety and security risks for speaking up against powerful corporations and governments, and they experience threats that are both physical and digital, and in many contexts that had a disproportionate impact on women. Next slide. The defenders we interviewed also spoke about the lack of direct and meaningful communications and transparency from the corporate actors operating the projects that we investigated. Many experience fossil fuel extraction as a form of economic and cultural pillage, criticize the insufficiency of oversight by governments who authorize and often subsidize extraction. Next slide. So just to zoom in a little bit in Canada, and I'll let my co-panelists speak more directly to the situation in Canada. Canada is the fourth producer of fuel worldwide. It's also the fifth producer of fossil gas and rising, and with pride leadership in international exports. At the time we launched the report, there were 7 fossil gas export projects that were all located in British Columbia. And really over the past few years, the government has been turbocharging production of LNG, claiming that it's a cleaner transition fuel, that it will create jobs, and I hope we can debunk some of these myths today. Just wanted to flag that Canada has a higher income historical emitter under international law, be it the UNFCCC, the Paris Agreement, recent opinion from the International Court of Justice, has a heightened responsibility to decarbonize its economy faster than other countries.
Oh, wow.
Should be providing technical support, actually, and climate finance to lower income countries that have less resources that embark into such a transition. And I think that the campaigning of what's within limb defenders, and you'll hear directly from Plato today, is really emblematic of the sort of typical human rights violation and illustrate what's gone wrong with sort of this renewed investment in fossil gas. Next slide. The report recommends that states defossilize, but also endorse the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. States should prevent corporate human rights abuses and protect environmental human rights defenders. We have specific recommendations addressed to the different states and companies that we've investigated. And I just wanted to flag that we have, for educators out there, we have an online course that is kind of like a learning journey. It's free, and it really sort of outlines the linkages between the risks associated with fossil fuel extraction and production and human rights that I would encourage you to check out if you want to learn more, both about Canada and its connection with global trends. Thank you so much.
Andy, can people find that course, I guess, on the amnesty.org website, is that correct?
I'll drop a link. Yes.
Beautiful. Okay.
There's also a link that will be included in the toolkit that everyone who's registered for.
Very good. Thank you, Candy, for sharing some awful information with us. But it is a wealth of information that will serve activists well. I'm now very honored to introduce someone for whom I have tremendous respect. Slado is wing chief of the Classique of the Gidinton clan of the Wet'suwet'en Nation. In October 2025, she received a suspended sentence for breaching an injunction. The injunction's intention was to ban land defenders from protecting the territory from construction of the Coastal GasLink pipeline back in 2021. Slado is a well-known spokesperson who has traveled the world speaking out about the criminalization of Wet'suwet'en land defenders and climate justice. She lives on her territory in what is now known as British Columbia with 3 children. There, she continues to advocate for the rights of the Wet'suwet'en people. Over to you, Slado.
Thank you so much. Denise, Tsakaise, Skaise, Slado, Sydney, Gidim Den, Hasayu, Zotin, Instan. I hold the name Slado in Cassia House of the Gidim Den clan. My English name is Molly Wickham, and I just want to thank Amnesty and Decolonial Solidarity for inviting me to this presentation. It's a topic that's very dear to my heart, of course. Most people know the Wet'suwet'en from being involved in our resistance to the pipeline. But in fact, our reoccupation of our territory in the Yinta began before any of the pipelines were proposed in our territory. Back in 2009, when I was starting to think about moving home, I began being involved in a bunch of, in a series of clan meetings where we proposed to and plan to build 5 cabins, one on each clan territory of the Wet'suwet'en, 22,000 square kilometers of territory that we have title over. I lived on the Yinta after building a cabin in 2012 to raise my one child at the time. And it was important for people to understand and for my children to grow up knowing our way of life and knowing who they were as Indigenous people. And having that connection to the land is what defines us as Indigenous people. Our laws come from natural law and our relationship and our responsibility to the Yinta. And this is an important piece because in order to be who we are, we have to be able to enact that. It's part of our identity. We have to be able to have a relationship with our laws and with our land and to uphold that responsibility of who we are. And as most people know, the Project of Canada has attempted to assimilate our people, has put all kinds of laws and policies in place to destroy our governance, to destroy our way of life. And this project has never ceased. It continues on in different ways today, and one of those ways that we're seeing now was through the construction of the Coastal GasLink pipeline. And now they have also proposed to build compressor stations in our territory. And so I just want to share a little bit on what the compressor stations are going to mean for us here on the ground in the Wet'suwet'en territory. I'm going to I'm not going to use the term natural gas. It sounds very benign. Physicians for social responsibility suggest using the term methane gas because it's more accurate. So I'll use that term. But the compressor stations are used, for people who are unaware, to push gas through the pipeline. Currently, the largest compressor station in BC belongs to the Coastal GasLink project. And CGL is planning on building 2 more compressor stations, or is planning on building 6 compressor stations in total, but 2 of which will be built on Wet'suwet'en territory. The Parrot Lake Station is 3.4 kilometers away from the Laksamasu village. So the Laksamasu is another clan of the Wet'suwet'en and have been reoccupying their territory and have built a beautiful village at one of their ancient village sites. And then the Titanium Peak Station is 15.6 kilometers away from the Minnesota Healing Center, which has been established for over a decade, and which is utilized by our people to try and counter some of these policies of the Canadian government to erase our people from the land and to strip us of our identity. And all of this is to support phase 2 of the LNG Canada project in Kitimat, which is one of the largest export facilities on the coast. So together, these two stations will take up about 90 football fields of space, including cutting down 22 football fields, clear cutting 22 football fields of timber in the areas that they plan to put the compressor stations. CGL plans to burn methane gas to power the stations instead of using electric generators, which in itself has huge impacts to the environment. And to
Yeah,
our
methane's
health,
way
which I'll
worse
talk about a little bit later.
than CO2.
And these
So the stuff that
compressor
isn't
stations
burnt
will
is
release huge
180
amounts of
times more.
untreated methane gas directly into
Very good.
the air during the process called venting, which occurs whenever they need to shut down a station for routine maintenance or during emergencies. And during venting periods, noise levels increase over 1,000 times, and air pollution doubles, at least doubles.
Wow.
Sometimes instead of venting, companies will use flaring to get rid of the methane gas. It's when they burn the methane gas directly, and the flare stacks can be from 65 feet tall to 300 feet tall in the sky. So imagine our pristine territories where our people are reoccupying and having village sites 3 kilometers away, 300-foot flare stacks of burning methane gas. This can cause significant light pollution because of how big the flame is, and a lot of air pollution because the plumes of black smoke that are released when this burning happens. So there's a lot of impacts from daily operations to venting to the flaring episodes. The compressor stations will expose people and the wildlife to chronic noise pollution, air pollution, GHG emissions, light pollution, all of which can cause extreme health and environmental harm. The health impacts range from sleep disruption, chronic noise pollution, burning eyes and throat, skin irritation, headaches from the odors coming from the compressor station. During venting periods, workers have reported ruptured eardrums. Long-term impacts include lung cancer and respiratory and cardiovascular diseases. So when we look at adding this onto the already severe health impacts that our people are experiencing from the fallout of colonization and all of the policies and the traumas that our people have already experienced, we just cannot endure. We cannot endure these kinds of impacts on an already crisis situation where our people are dying. Our people are literally dying every week. We're going to funerals every week, every other week. Young people, old people, from everything, from all kinds of fallout of the trauma of colonization. The harm to our wildlife, the noise pollution can harm particularly those that rely on auditory communication. Studies have found negative changes in abundance and reproduction of birds, insects, and spiders.
Oh no.
During the construction, there would be clear cutting of our trees, potential runoffs, and we say potential runoffs, but we know from past experience of CGL construction that we have seen severe runoffs from work sites, flooded work sites, in fact, that are going into the critical salmon habitat and the headwaters of our whole watershed that impact the water quality, that impact the fish habitats. And we as Gidimden, we are responsible for the headwaters, the Maurice watershed, the headwaters of the Ridzinqua, the headwaters of the Skeena, that flow all the way to the ocean. We're responsible to ensure that that is taken care of, that these headwaters are not dissipated, and the salmon that we rely on are not dissipated, that they come to spawn in our territories, and specifically closest to the Titanium Peak compressor station. It's estimated that this construction will take 3 to 5 years to build these two compressor stations. And when I heard this, this was probably the most devastating part of the impacts that because we've already lived consecutive years of CGL construction and the impacts that it has had on our way of life, on us as a nation, on us as communities, and us as Indigenous women. We will see the man camps come back. We're going to see our access to our territory and our ability to enact our laws go away. We're barely beginning to recover from the construction of the CGL pipeline, which resulted in severe health impacts to the people on the Yinta who actually lived through this horrific experience. Extreme disturbances to our waterways, our wetlands, and our wildlife. You know, we've seen unprecedented impacts to our animals. As a hunter, you know, my family and I have been sustaining ourselves and our children by hunting, you know, moose and deer and beaver and all of the other animals throughout the years. And since the construction of the CGL pipeline began, it's more often than not that we can't utilize the organs of the animals anymore because they're full of cysts. They're full of tumors. It is rare these days that I get to bring the organs of the animal, which is a delicacy and a huge, important source of minerals and vitamins for our elders, that I can bring that to our elders now. And so we're seeing all of the fallout, all of the health impacts on our territory, the criminalization of our people, the prevention of our access to lands, all of the roads that got shut down and that will be shut down, all of the territories and the areas that would be shut down to us, the violation of our human rights to enact our laws and governance. You know, like, in order to be who we are, we have to follow our laws. We have to be able to live those things. And projects like this not only impact our health and our wellness, but they impact our ability to simply be who we are as Indigenous people. The increased traffic causes severe safety issues, especially for, you know, those of us that are trying to access the territories with our children, with our elders, with our community members. Increased policing and surveillance, the harassment and intimidation impacts on our health and wellness as a nation, you know, prevents people from wanting to come to the Yinta because they're scared. They don't want to be harassed. They don't want to be surveilled. They don't want to be arrested and thrown in jail arbitrarily, because that is what comes with these kinds of projects, and that has been exactly the experience we've had with coastal gasing already. But most importantly, this is a risk of extinction to our nation. And when I say that, I know we're talking about, you know, the presentation is extinction. And this is extinction of our nation as a people. And it seems extreme to say that. You know, we see genocides happening all over the world. We have experienced genocide as a nation. We have survived that. And now this is the new kind of genocide. This is the way it looks today, because the impacts of climate change on our land and our ability to access our land are already so severe. We are at a critical point. We cannot endure, you know, the Canadian project of the, you know, Carney's plan to create a conservation corridor through the north, opening up every single type of extraction that we can imagine. You know, naming the LNG Canada Phase 2 of critical importance so that they can fast track through Bill C-5, that they can fast track this project and the PRGT pipeline, which our neighbors, the Gixan, are up against, who will experience the exact same things that we have over a number of years. And so we just cannot allow this to happen, because we have to be able to survive as Indigenous people. And the only way for us to recover from the impacts of colonization and what we've already experienced and the policies that continue to be put in place to erase us from our landscapes, to erase us from the face of the earth, we have to be able to have that connection to our land. We have to be able to be who we are. We have to be able to practice our culture, and it's not just a matter of we want to sing our songs. You know, sure, the Canadian government, they'll let us sing our songs. They'll even invite us to pay, you know, and give us a nice honorarium to come sing our songs so that they can applaud themselves and say that that they support Indigenous cultures. But that is not Indigenous cultures. That's part of who we are, but we are the land. And when the land is desecrated, when the land is destroyed, our very existence as Indigenous people is put at risk. And that we cannot allow to happen. For us, or for any of the other Indigenous people around the world that are experiencing the exact same things as us. How is that?
Slato, many of us are familiar with some of what you've described, but we haven't lived it. And so we thank you for your presence here tonight and for your brave and tireless efforts. Our final speaker, with whom Amnesty Canada has partnered to organize this webinar, is Kate Turner. Kate uses the pronouns she, her, and is a white settler living in Teotihuacan, Montreal. Kate has served as the National Coordinator of Decolonial Solidarity since 2022 and has been involved in local organizing for human rights, climate justice, and the liberation of Palestine. Decolonial Solidarity is a national grassroots network working to deliver the struggles of frontline Indigenous communities to the doorsteps of financial decision makers. The network is building local power to combat the threat of liquefied natural gas expansion. How do they do that? By organizing communities against the investment of federal public funds in these projects. The Decolonial Solidarity Network has been built by people across so-called Canada, including Indigenous peoples, settlers, and immigrants. It's driven by love, a sense of justice, and our responsibility to be good ancestors to all of our relations, our descendants, our neighbors, and the earth. Kate, over to you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Hi, everybody. I'm so grateful to have had this opportunity tonight to hear such powerful speakers, Candy and Slato. There's so much powerful and fantastic information that's already been shared. And I'm here because for the last couple of months, I've been working with a few different groups on engaging our members of parliament at the federal level, or MPs, on the topic of public finance. And I hope that many of you in the audience tonight will be inspired or motivated to join a journey with us over the next 2 to 3 months to work collectively to put pressure on our MPs not to finance the expansion of liquefied natural gas, or LNG for short. So we can go to the first slide. This is a picture of the Nass estuary, which is an ecologically significant location where the proposed floating Silism LNG export terminal would be built. However, this terminal would be only one of multiple LNG export terminals, which includes LNG Canada that Slato has already spoken about in depth. These terminals would violate Indigenous rights and threaten vital salmon habitat. They will also cost us billions of dollars. They will take many years to build, and they will likely never turn a profit due to a predicted decline in gas prices. So let's go to the next slide. Just to define the acronym LNG, because I know not everyone is familiar with it, it stands for liquefied natural gas, and Slato has already pointed out that we should really be using the term methane gas. So whenever you hear the word methane or natural gas or LNG, it's all the same chemical substance. LNG is just a liquefied version of the gas.
It's cool.
So two of the projects that we are really focused on right On the left here, you can see LNG Canada Phase 1, which has been built. And this is a picture of the flare stack, which has been consistently flaring for over a year, shooting massive flames into the sky and exposing the Kitimat community to potentially hazardous levels of methane. And as Slato has already outlined, LNG Canada is fed by Coastal GasLink, and they want to double its capacity. On the right is a picture, or a mock-up, sorry, not a picture. It's a mock-up of the proposed Systems Export Terminal, which would be fed by the Prince Rupert Gas Transmission Pipeline, or PRGT for short. So it's really important for us to note that right now these projects have not been financed. The fact that they will be so expensive and take so long to build is a big problem for the companies because gas prices are volatile, demand is in decline, and a ton of LNG production capacity is about to come online from the US. So all of this means that gas prices are predicted to drop even further. And this is an opportunity, but it's also a risk for us. As an opportunity, every minute of delay for these projects and every cost overrun makes them less profitable. So companies are more hesitant to drive these projects forward for two reasons. One, because LNG prices are very likely to decline, and two, because cost overruns are almost guaranteed. But the other side of this equation is that this is also a risk for our movement because we are now seeing an unprecedented demand from private corporations to have public money invested into these projects. This serves as a way for the government to de-risk projects by backing loans and padding profit margins with millions or billions of dollars that belong to you and should be spent on projects that serve your community and the public good. So this is even more egregious because both of these export terminals that are shown in the slide here are 100% foreign owned. LNG Canada is owned by a consortium of companies based in the UK, in Malaysia, China, Japan, and South Korea. And Systems is owned by an American company and has received some early funding from US private equity firms that are linked to Trump and Epstein. So putting government money into these projects is the exact opposite of getting our elbows up. We can go to the next slide. Slato referenced Bill C5 as well, and I thought it would be helpful to talk very briefly about that. With the passing of C5, this demand for public subsidies that produce private profits is being put into our laws. C5's stated intention is to fast-track projects by allowing corporations to bypass consultation and consent with indigenous communities, as well as bypassing environmental and labor regulations that are designed to keep us safe. And this bill has become a lightning rod for indigenous resistance across so-called Canada. And if anyone's interested in learning more, I would encourage you all to go check out 8 Fire Rising, which is an organization that is supporting and coordinating resistance to C5 and other provincial laws with similar goals. And I can put a link to that website in a few minutes. So after passing C5, Carney created the Major Projects Office and appointed the former CEO of Enbridge to lead it. The Major Projects Office, their role is to decide which projects are in the national interest and to facilitate project financing. So far, 11 projects have been referred to the Major Projects Office, including LNG Canada Phase 2 and Systems. However, many of the projects that have been referred have already been permitted and approved. So some experts are now saying that the real purpose of Bill C5 is to facilitate public financing. And there is a really brilliant analysis on this that was posted on the 8 Fire Rising website. So we can go to the next slide. We know that public financing will be a key way that government intends So the Canada Infrastructure Bank, there's a key decision maker who is Gregor Robertson, and his riding is in Vancouver. And then for the Canada Growth Fund, one of the, actually a very important decision maker for a lot of this public financing is the Finance Minister, François-Philippe Champagne. So other Crown corporations and funds that we need to keep our eye on because of their past investments in projects like Coastal GasLink or Cedar LNG are Export Development Canada. And so a key decision maker there is Meninder Sidhu, whose riding is in Brampton. Melanie Joly, whose riding is in Montreal, and she controls the Strategic Response Fund. And as well, Steve McKinnon, whose riding is Gatineau, and he controls several different funds related to transport corridors. So these 5 decision makers control billions of dollars in public finance, and they've been elected in our backyards. Because most of us here probably live in cities, we have access to Liberal MPs. Their offices are in our neighborhoods. They are not untouchable. And every MP needs to hear how unpopular these projects are and how unacceptable it would be to put public money into them. So based on what we've shared today about the predicted decline in gas prices, you might be wondering why the government is backing LNG. And one possible answer to this comes from a report that Environmental Defense produced last year, which tracks the number of times that Liberal MPs were being lobbied by the fossil fuel industry. And so the average is 3 times per day.
Whoa!
It's not unlikely to imagine that Liberal MPs have been sold this fairy tale of how profitable LNG is going to be. But what they're not hearing is the voices of their constituents who oppose these projects. And therefore, they do not yet understand that these projects will incur a political cost to them. So we urgently need to change that. And I'm going to share a bit about why this matters in my last slide. But first, yes, perfect. Here's an overview of what you can do in the next 2 to 3 months. So throughout February, March, and April, MPs will be back and forth between their constituency office and Ottawa almost every week. So this is the best time to get their attention while they are more available to their constituents. So we've got a toolkit that will be sent to you after this webinar with everything that you need to start engaging your MPs. And so the goal here would be to gather as many constituents as you can and just keep bugging them. Be as annoying as you possibly can until they schedule a meeting. So unfortunately, one email is not going to be enough and one phone call is not going to be enough. They will ignore you if they think you can get away with it. So every one of us is going to have to make a commitment tonight to keep following up with them until we get that meeting. And so I'd like to share a short video with you about how one group in Burlington succeeded in getting a meeting with their MP, Karina Gold, right after they dropped off printed materials at her office.
6 people here today outside Karina Gold's office. We were hoping to meet with one of her staff to speak to them about a briefing we put together about just transition and how there should be no more public financing for fossil fuels. No one's here, we haven't gotten a meeting yet, so we're going to leave the briefing here for now and hopefully speak to Karina about it very, very soon. So I'm just going to slide it out there. We look forward to them reading it and talking to us about it.
So, once you get that meeting, then the goal would be to pack that meeting with as many people as possible and share this information with them. Share everything that you've learned from this webinar tonight. So I can tell you from my own experience that depending on where your MP is located, they may not know the first thing about these projects. I know that sounds totally unbelievable, but the reality is that you will likely have more information than they do about these projects. And this is really important.
That's scary.
Many of us have been led to believe that you with absolute confidence that you already know more about these projects than many Liberal MPs, especially those based in Ontario and Quebec. And so many of you are probably also wondering what can be done if your MP won't respond to you. So just to give a quick example, I'm part of a group that has been trying to contact Minisy for months. Her office appears to be abandoned. Our weekly voicemails are not being answered. So we've gone to the next step, and we've partnered with local community groups to organize an info session for Melanie's constituents. And this is just one example of how you can keep moving forward to increase the pressure, even on an MP that is ignoring you. And before we go to my last slide, I just want to add a very quick plug for Change Course, which is a student and youth-led organization planning a week of action on university campuses from March 9th to 13th. And their goal is very similar to our goal here tonight. It's to stop financing for projects like PRGT. And I know we have some young activists in the audience tonight, so if you are a young activist or a student, I would really encourage you to go check out Change Course. So let's go to the last slide. Just a little bit of motivation for everybody. I know it's really hard to believe that talking to politicians can make a difference, but we do need to use every tactic that we have available if we have a chance of winning. Indigenous resistance to extraction projects is the #1 way that projects are delayed or stopped, but it's our job to step up and stand beside frontline and fenceline Indigenous communities. And when resistance also grows in urban centers,
Oh my God.
to key decision makers, our odds of winning go way up. And when we get organized before projects are financed, we have an even better
Doubling
shot.
the cost of
And so
CDL.
here I just quickly put together some inspiring examples of times that this has worked. In the last 15 years alone, Indigenous leaders and impacted communities have killed the Southwestern Energy Fracking Project, Northern Gateway, the Pacific Northwest Terminal, Energy East, the Tech Frontier Mine, and Gienel, Quebec. And resistance has also more than doubled the cost of Coastal GasLink to over $14 billion. We have pushed our governments to reverse decisions, such as the reversal of the Greenbelt land grab in 2023 that happened with the Ford government in Ontario. And we have pressured governments to issue moratoriums on tankers, trucks, and fossil fuels. So hopefully in a year from now, we will also be able to add LNG Canada Phase 2 and Citizens to that list. And thank you very much.
Kate, thank you for sharing your activist strategies and for partnering with Amnesty. We will walk forward together. Now, the person who has pulled this webinar together is Tara Skur. Tara is a settler on traditional territory of the Comox people in Comox, British Columbia. She serves as Amnesty International Canada's campaigner on corporate accountability and climate justice. Tara has been involved in efforts to support human rights defenders in the Americas who defend their territories and rights from abuses by Canadian companies and by Canada's economic policies. She's a former journalist who covered peace and social justice initiatives in post-war Guatemala and human rights issues in El Salvador. And here she is.
Thanks, Nolan. And hi, everyone. I just want to thank Andy, Sarah, and Kate for just sharing your excellent overview and helping us develop our understanding of these issues a little bit better. So I'm just going to take a couple minutes to sort of give a little bit of a global context from Amnesty's perspective and just summarize where we're at before we head into Q&A. And so just in terms of the global context, none of this will be a surprise to you who are here on the call, but we know that we're in a time of global economic flux where we're seeing the distribution of unimaginable wealth into fewer and fewer hands. AI and robotics are reshaping the labor market, again, assisting in concentrating power and wealth in fewer hands. We're also experiencing an exponential rise in authoritarian practices that are backed by corporate capture, and that defense and tech industries are the major beneficiaries of that. And those of us working on energy transition know that there's a kind of a battle for supremacy between major global superpowers for control of minerals, tech innovation, and energy. And these have huge multilateral but also intergenerational impacts. And so our kind of mandate as Amnesty moving forward is to continue to resist and disrupt the entrenchment of a world order that's based on unchecked greed and the unrelenting search for profit without any red lines. I know for many people there have not been red lines before, and this removal of red lines is just expanding. So this is something that we, as Amnesty, are committed to using our platform to challenging this business as usual narrative that we know will lead to more sacrificed zones, more sacrificed peoples. We're concerned that the unchecked greed of Wall Street equity firms, like we heard about earlier, that are behind some of these projects and other transnational companies, but also the unchecked ambition of these so-called middle powers, like Canada, which we've all been hearing about, they'll increasingly make them unbearable, even more unbearable for even more people. The expansion of these fossil fuel projects and the over 3,000 projects that we know are sitting there, in different stages of development, will compound the intergenerational harms that Indigenous and other peoples already experience. And so, we know that as the other speakers have said, these projects put millions of lives and ecosystems at risk. And so maybe the last thing I'll just say from Amnesty's perspective is that, Canada Budget 2025 and Prime Minister Carney's Davos speech, they laid out more of the same, a well-worn roadmap for exploitation, but this time closed in language that's designed to project the image of Canada as a scrappy fighter punching above its weight on the world stage. So we believe that this narrative has to be challenged, and Canada has to urgently forge new path forward. So we're asking you to join us. Throughout 2026, Amnesty members and supporters, decolonial solidarity, land defenders, and partner organizations will be educating, continuing to deepen our own education, our own organization, building our own networks, and connecting with each other to challenge this insane notion that during global climate crisis, during a cost of living crisis, with an aging population and a healthcare funding crisis, that the public treasury should be used to help billionaire investors build new fossil fuel infrastructure. This is what we are challenging. And so the last thing I'll say is that, as you all know, the changes that we need to happen are going to be handed to us. We have to build the vision and make the changes that we want to see. Many of you who are on this call today are already doing that work in your communities. And you know, and they know that together we're strong. So we hope that you'll join us and make 2026 the year that we end using public money to finance this fossil fuel insanity. So we're asking you to, when you get the follow-up email after this webinar, to download the toolkit. It's really want to shout out and express gratitude to the team at Decolonial Solidarity for writing the toolkit and for allowing us to contribute to that, to share with all of you. There's lots of great links in there. There's a link to the human rights education course that Candy mentioned. And there's also a form that you can click that will help us learn more about what kind of actions you would like just need your consent to be able to follow up with you. But we are here for you in those 5 key writings that Kate mentioned, but also in writings across the country where you're planning to meet with your MP. And then both Amnesty and Decolonial Solidarity and all of the different partners that we work with will be holding a series of actions across the country throughout 2026. And so join one. If there isn't one near you, you know that the power is in your hands to create your own action. And we'll be here every step of the way to support you and do that. So I think we're going to move into questions now. Oh, sorry, I have to do my little animation there because we're part on that. We're going to move into Q&A, and so I'm going to turn things over to Ian Hyde, who is a longtime Amnesty Canada leader on corporate accountability and climate justice. And maybe I'll just leave up this last slide with information about how to reach us. Thanks.
Thanks, Tara. So while we're going through the webinar, there were quite a few questions in the chat and quite a few in the Q&A, and I'm trying to sort of group them. Some are about the role of the RCMP or protesters human rights defenders being branded as terrorists, that kind of approach. Some are about strategy, others are about costs. So I'll just try to go through them in groups. So Pam spoke, who was at Fairy Creek, the old world forest, talked about the RCMP and how they act. And in the chat, there was talk about the RCMP and the CIRDG group, IRG, and now turned into CRU. And Kate mentioned about in Papua New Guinea and Bougainville when the mines there and how anybody who, environmental defenders who spoke against it were branded as terrorists and treason. So that sort of approach of how people who dare to disagree and challenge the government are treated so poorly and branded as terrorists or anti-Canadian, that sort of thing. Maybe, Slido, you could speak to that, and others may want to, but if you've experienced it firsthand, maybe you could speak about that and how that is, what's new with that and the behavior of the RCMP and what others are experiencing.
Thank you. That's a really good question, and it's a really important thing for us to take into account, is the treatment by the RCMP and some trends that we're seeing moving forward. The dehumanization of our people. So often, there's racism has always been used to dehumanize people, and the reason to dehumanize us is so that they can justify their treatment of Indigenous people and our allies and accomplices who are supporting us in our land defense and the protection of our territories. And so this is a huge thing that I think all of society can counter, is by humanizing people who are defending the territories, people who are defending the old growth, by holding accountable these, the police, the CRU, the Critical Response Unit, who's also policing pro-Palestine events. And so we see that this is we're looking at normalization of a police state and abuse by the state, and we have to counter that every single step of the way. And so Amnesty has been really great at supporting us and just humanizing us, normalizing what we're doing as a basic human right to take care of our territories, to take care of ourselves, to stand up for our governance. And so doing actions like that, creating awareness that humanizes the people who are the most at risk, I think is really important. And one other thing just to mention is that I think because of all this work and because we're launching human rights complaints, we have really high profile cases against, for us, the abuse of process against the RCMP, against the critical industry response group, is that they're starting to utilize private security now. And so we saw that with CGL. We're expecting that with PRGT and other projects in the north, is that they're starting to use private security to do the surveillance, harassment, intimidation, because we're shining a light on the behaviors of the critical response unit of the state and the RCMP. And so I think that we have to continue to do those things. Okay.
Great, thanks. Kate or Candy, want to add anything before I move on? Okay, I'll move on to it. There were questions around costs. So, Eric for one, and then a couple of other people. It appears oil and gas companies and pushing of LNG, when it feels unlikely to make a profit, fracking and the cost of that, why would companies continue if they feel there's going to be no profit? And also, do you think emphasizing that these projects are not going to make money is a potential strategy that we should emphasize? And I think maybe Kate and then Candy.
Sure. I mean, first of all, yes, I think emphasizing the just like the missing economic case for these projects in conversations with either your MP or people that you organize with or your family members, like whatever audience you're speaking to. I think emphasizing that is always helpful. And I will admit that like I don't have a much of an economic background, but maybe one of the other panelists can speak more to this. But I guess I would say to the question of why companies are continuing to promote LNG when it's not likely to be profitable. I think first of all, the more government support they can get dumped into projects, the better that is for their bottom line. And there's also a strategy here of locking us into dependence on these massive, expensive infrastructure projects. Like there's a sunken cost fallacy. Once we've invested 10 or 14 or $20 billion into an export terminal, it makes it a lot more likely that we as a country, that Canada will continue extracting and producing and relying on methane gas for many decades to come. Long after this like window that we have to really chase and like push for a just transition, long after that window begins to close. So yeah, Candy, I hope you have something more to add to that.
Not much. I think I would add that it's easier to do business as usual, and the resources are here. So, corporate actors are driven by profits before anything. So, it's I think some of what we're trying to push in terms of that conversation, even at Amnesty, is to say we need to transition, and that transition needs to not replicate the same extractivist models. I think that the other pieces, a lot of those projects are heavily subsidized. There are serious tax cuts and sort of incentives to doing the same thing, and we're not necessarily, because of questions around efficiency and scale, seeing the same backup for renewable energy projects. I think the last thing is there's obviously advocacy with government actors. I do think that for companies, when we do some campaigning and advocacy, speaking in terms of what is going to hurt their bottom line tends to work more than reputational damage. And so I think making those economic arguments is really important vis-a-vis MPs, vis-a-vis advocacy in multilateral forums. When you want to seek corporate accountability, I think it is particularly important to think about language that's really thinking about what hurts. I was a corporate lawyer before I transitioned back into human rights because I had law school debt. And it's just interesting to see there are different organisms, right? Like you can think about metrics around shame, naming and shaming, but with corporate actors in particular, thinking about what we're going to do that will harm their bottom line is something that they will be more responsive to, I think, in a lot of contexts.
Yeah, no, just quickly add to that, just about the idea of control when there's into indigenous resistance, I think, is a really important thing. We talked about CGL was, billions and billions and billions of dollars over cost and over budget and delayed for years and years. And that was a direct result of the resistance because they did not get the free, fair, and informed consent. But it's all about the image of control as well. So they couldn't let us win, no matter what, even if it was going to cost them, because they had to maintain control over indigenous peoples and indigenous lands, and they had to maintain that image of Canada because that's what Canada is built on. And so I do think that it is really important to have that economic argument as well, and to list those things. This is what it costs. This is what indigenous resistance is going to cost you if you don't have free, fair, and informed consent. This is what human rights violations are going to cost you. Not only because honestly, they don't care about the environment. They only care about the money it's going to cost them. So I think those points are important.
While you're there, Slato, that question came from, one of the early questions in the chat came from Martina, talking about the BC government sort of using colonial methods, signing extractive agreements with some First Nations, also in mining, and of course in mining and the forestry as well. What do you think can be done in those situations? Are there examples we can learn from? Like, what are we to do in those situations?
Sorry, in the situations where governments are signing deals with?
Yeah, with certain First Nations and making MOUs with certain areas and not putting together the full picture. They're sort of using their colonial approach to use the same approach as always, but some kind of agreements with First Nations, but not necessarily including the elders in the area. How do we combat that?
I mean, I think we have to understand that it's everybody's responsibility to know and understand that there's a lot of complexity and that the Canadian and provincial governments have designed this system to undermine communities, to undermine the grassroots people, the elders, and that often, and those are representative of the representatives of Indian band councils, often. And so they're not always representing the people, just like we can know and understand that, like, our, Canadian or provincial leaders are not representing the voice of the people either. And so we have to be able to sit with that complexity and support the people who are raising their voice, because our laws, Indigenous laws, come from the land. It is natural law. Oh, here comes my daughter. She's getting tired of me being on the call. So we have to support natural law and understand that we don't have the rights to destroy our territories. We don't have the rights to let go of our responsibilities. And we can't be so human-centric. We have to think about the land, and we have to think about the non-human relatives. And so, in supporting the people that are doing that, getting a new hairdo here. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Question for specifically, I was aimed at Kennedy, but I guess this is talking about influencing decisions nationally and internationally, so moving just at a higher level from Amnesty perspective, or even from other organizations trying to resist it at the level of the United States or at the international level, or upholding Indigenous rights generally at the global level. Andy?
I can start, and maybe I'll pass it over to Tar, who's a very experienced campaigner at Amnesty. I think at Amnesty we really, and I think that was the rationale behind this research and campaign, we definitely think we're stronger when we speak together and when we create sort of alliances within sort of the framework of international solidarity. And so I think it's very important to activate and to sort of disrupt locally, and for that's how you build people power. You start locally, and then you sort of make that trickle up, I guess, to disrupt at various levels of decision making, where often people who are the most impacted, most marginalized don't necessarily have a seat at the table. And so I really, really appreciated Kate's concrete examples of like, what it is you can do at your level to communicate with your MP. I think when it comes to activation and campaigning, mobilization and advocacy, we pair that campaigning with discussions in multilateral forums. So we have a presence at COP, for example, where negotiations are happening. You have a flurry of fossil fuel lobbyists and Amnesty participants to say, well, hold on a second, we have to set metrics to think about mitigation and adaptation and climate reparations. The stories of frontline and fence-line defenders should be at the center of the conversation. And so I think everyone has a role to play, from allyship, local grassroots activism, to voting. I always encourage people to vote in directions that sort of serve some of those struggles. And then, at Amnesty, we have the tools to also participate, for example, in, UN-led discussions and other multilateral spaces where we might have access to government officials who are not always sort of interested in hearing from, human rights, nonprofit folks, and sort of can sit very comfortably at the table as sort of corporate lobbyist. So I do think an integration of like campaigning at various levels, and I think that's why the power of this webinar is to kind of bridge conversations around what can happen globally, nationally, and then at the local level is very important. And I think it's even more important at a time where we see a really serious pull towards authoritarian practices that sort of embolden the shrinking of civic space and creates less and less opportunities, but also more and more repression for people on the margins who are defending and holding on to their human rights. And I don't know if you want to add anything, Tara, because I think in many contexts you've thought about that sort of activation across various sort of layered.
Sure, thanks, Candy. Yeah, well, I think, am I unmuted? Can you hear me? Okay, thanks. I think, as you're speaking, I was just thinking about, some of the concrete examples that Kate had given as well on the local ways to engage, and I think that, we often think of the moral argument, the human rights argument, and I think in some cases that does work because politicians, for the large part, are either given, you have to be, and I think that there are people who are genuinely interested in legacy. What am I leaving behind? What is my fingerprint on this community? And I think it is worthwhile to know at the local level who your representative is, and what it, in a positive sense, but also in a strategic sense, what buttons, you need to push hard with them. Are they on a committee? Just to get to know who your MP is, and also to be able to bring to them the financial arguments that we were talking about earlier. So there are groups like the Suzuki Foundation. We've got a paper in our kit from them looking at some of the ways that LNG is sold that doesn't actually stand up when you look at the numbers, Pembina, Dogwood, and Earth. There are a lot of organizations that are really delving into that. So like Kate said earlier, we have access to a lot of information that our MPs don't have, and so part of it is packaging that. Part of it is also letting them become aware of how globally LNG and these pipelines through horrific criminalization of Indigenous land defenders has given Canada a black eye. A few years ago, when the last RCMP raid happened and the last on a large scale that Broken Territory happened, we asked Amnesty members around the world to contact Canadian ambassadors in their country, and they did. They showed up in delegations, they wrote letters. We had a lot of response from from those Canadian diplomatic missions. That sends a message. That's connecting what's happening locally with your representative with the global world that does care about this and does see these issues as connected. So I think it's important to draw those pieces together all the time. And, you know, Indigenous peoples have been in international fora forever, making these cases, making these arguments, speaking, making submissions, making those connections. You know, they're showing the way to do this. And so, you know, we're lucky to have access to those resources. We can start to put those pieces together. And, you know, figure out where to lean into the legacy, the ego, the financial argument, you know, the climate future. Because, yeah, I mean, I guess maybe I'm talking myself in a circle here, but I think, you know, we need the hard numbers and facts, but I think that given the authoritarian climate that we're in, we really need to also push on people's, you know, moral duty to
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to Greg. Happy birthday to Greg.
But I think we do need to lean into that as well. So, I don't know if that answers your question.
And we need to finish in a minute, and there's quite a few questions. Some of them are around strategy and contacting MPs. I think we'll respond to those in writing to everybody afterwards, because we do have a strategy and a toolkit around members of parliament. So some of these that we're leaving, we'll get to them in writing later. And you know, I don't know if we should stop there. There's a question that Michael had around coalitions that I think is important for working in coalitions. And also a question around the Climate Line Finance Act that's in the Senate now. Maybe, Kate, you could speak to those? Working in coalitions on the Climate Line Finance Act, if you're familiar with it?
Unfortunately, I can't say much about the Climate Line Finance Act. I mean, I think I was more familiar with the previous version of it. I know it's a very important piece of legislation, and that a lot of experts on climate finance and the climate crisis are pushing really hard on that. So I think that's a really good sign that all of us should also be pushing as hard as we can on that. But I can't say much more than that. I think the question about working in coalition, I would say yes. I think everything that we do as organizers or activists or people who care about justice, we always have to be thinking about collective action and collective impact. Like most of us cannot have the impact that we would want to have if we're just working alone. And so I think we always need to be thinking about building coalitions, building partnerships, reaching across, like out of our silos and reaching out to others and seeing how we can connect different issues together, because we're stronger together, and that's the only way that we've got a chance of winning.
Thanks for that. And we will unfortunately have to finish off now. I just want to apologize to Lucy for not getting some of your questions about community and activism. We'll try to cover some of that when we send out the toolkit and a summary of the webinar, which will also be available. So we're towards the end. I'm going to give it to you now to finish it off and thank everybody.
Great, thanks, Ian. Well, first of all, just thank you to all of you for being here. We're just so thrilled that you've given us 90 minutes of your time, you know, on a Wednesday night, because it's Wednesday. So we will follow up by Friday, hopefully with the recording uploaded to YouTube, given access to, but also with the toolkit. It's about 6 pages long with links to it. I would really encourage you, even if you're not going to engage with your MP. I'm in a region, for example, in Vancouver Island, with an MP that, I mean, I'd really love to be able to change his mind, but, you know, I'm not sure. I'll have to get together with some of my North Island people on this call to see what we can do. But there are other things that we can do. So please do take a couple of minutes and find the link in the toolkit to sign up, because that way we can have an ongoing dialogue together. We are also engagement is growing, what are the resources people need, what changes are happening. So please do lean into us to be there for you. And then maybe just the third thing I'll say is in the toolkit, we've also put an invitation out if people would like to share their successes or share their journey in engaging on these issues. We're inviting you to make a submission to Amnesty's newsletter that has quite a broad reach. It's put together by the amazing activism team that's been managing this webinar today. So all of that to say, I'm sorry it's 6 pages long with a lot of links, but hopefully you'll be able to take the time over the next few days to digest it and then to sign up and to reach out to us with any questions. Kate, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
No, you captured it perfectly. But thank you again for everyone who's here, and a huge amount of gratitude for the co-panelists, Candy and Plato. Thank you.
So I think that concludes our Zoom session. So thank you to everyone. I hope you have a wonderful evening or afternoon, depending on where you are. Maybe it's morning. And to be continued.
Recording stopped.
We will ask everybody to leave the webinar now. Thanks very much for coming, everybody. Good night.